one of our first panelists from tonight is Amanda Farinacci, who is based in New York and is a reporter for the NY1. Amanda has covered a lot of variety of different topics, but she is also known for an interesting lawsuit that she pulled out in terms of age discrimination, and we hope to hear very much forward from her tonight on this. Secondly, we also have Lisa, and has a legal background. She is the co-founder of the Phenomenal Woman Global, a non-profit organization based in Switzerland, and also does work in Uganda. And we look forward to hearing about how they support and provide coaching and different services they offer also for women. Third, we have Julianne Taff, who had taught English as a second language teacher in Ohio State University for over 27 years. Julianne will be discussing how she sued the university for age discrimination and won. These are perhaps some of the inspiration we can learn from this. What are some of the pitfalls, but also some of the challenges that we need to overcome. Fourth, we have Janine Vanderburg, who is based in Denver. An Encore champion and longtime community activist, Janine is leading Changing the Narrative in Colorado, a campaign started in 2019 to change the way people think, talk, and act about aging and ageism. Now, with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our fantastic line of sight. I would kindly ask you to quickly introduce yourself, your work, and your thoughts on this. So perhaps we should start with Amanda. I will take it in the order of my screen over here. So I will start with Amanda, then we can move on to Julianne, Janine, and Lisa. The floor is yours.
Well, hello everyone here in New York City. It's like 10:30 in the morning, so I'm
good morning.
It's scheduled than all of you, but I have to tell you, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this.
The pleasure is ours.
I am a TV news veteran. I've had my job in local news for 20 years. And as you mentioned, you know, obviously I have my career and different things I've experienced. And within the last couple of years, several coworkers of mine and I just sort of started having similar experiences, just in terms of feeling sort of pushed out, and it became very clear that there was a preference for younger women and older men. And rather than just sort of take that and sort of move on, we started talking to each other, and we actually are suing the company for age and gender discrimination, which we were on the cover of the New York Times, we made the cover of the New York Post. Our case has gotten a lot of traction because that's why this is so important, is because nobody gets younger. I am the youngest plaintiff in our group, but I'll be 42 soon. And I thought wrongly in my life that I would have had a little more time to sort of, you know, because as the sort of poem referenced, you know, we spend a lot of time as women trying to figure out who we are. I feel like I'm at the top of my game in my job professionally, right? And it seems like that doesn't matter because maybe I don't look a certain way anymore, or I'm not a man who's allowed to age with gravitas, right? And especially you turn on TV news and who do you see? You see these old men sitting next to these young women. And it's crazy because I have a lot of talent. My plaintiffs and I have more than 100 years of TV news reporting experience among us. And you know, the time is now to stand up for yourself and start addressing this, because as I said, nobody gets younger, and women are so invaluable, especially as they get older. Things I know and understand to be true for myself and my role in my workplace, I had no clue of when I was as young as the preference would my bosses would have me be, right? So that's why I think this is so important, and I appreciate the discourse that you guys are all bringing here, because and I should say that this is a real issue. A judge recently allowed us to basically, our company was trying to throw the lawsuit out and say it was baseless and without merit, and our judge recently ruled that the motion to dismiss the case was not. It was dismissed. And so we're moving ahead with the trial. I mean, there's a case here, and a lot of people have paid attention, and it resonates for a lot of people. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and chat with all of you about this.
Well, thank you for the openness and transparency you're also showing about this. We really appreciate that. And we look forward to rediscussing ageism and age inclusion in the workplace, and how more than now this is relevant across the globe. with no further ado, I will hand it over to Julianne to also introduce yourself and your work.
Hi, it's Julianne.
I apologize.
TAFE, that's okay. That's okay. I'm used to it. And just Julie is fine.
Okay.
And
Noted.
I'm glad I'm coming right after Amanda because I want to address her directly and just tell her, stick with it. It's the impossible is sometimes possible. And I really understand what some of the things that she has said. Just last week, my experience started in 2013, and we settled our lawsuit in 2017. It's 2020, and last week I found myself thinking decisively, I am glad that this happened to me. So it took 7 years for me to reach a point where I feel like I have the earth is now stable under my feet once more. And I'm a different person and I'm a better person for it. However, having been on the receiving end, it's nothing I would wish on anyone. It is, the things that I have learned are, like many discrimination, forms of discrimination, it is extremely difficult to prove. It is so effective, discrimination works because it makes the person on the receiving end feel crazy, and it increases self-doubt. And for years, I found myself talking myself out of thoughts like, could this have anything to do with the fact that I'm 50? And one of the things I've learned is if you find yourself asking that question, chances are very good it's true. And I think that goes for any form of discrimination. Age discrimination is the last acceptable form of discrimination. It is ubiquitous. It is in our humor. It's in entertainment. It's in education. It is, and we do it to ourselves. I know I found it very difficult to get through to my colleagues, there were 13 of us, that this was happening. It wasn't until the university settled that my colleagues came to say, well, maybe it was our age. The other thing I learned is it is invisible, especially because it is institutionalized. Right. And that also is true of many forms of discrimination. How unfortunately, age discrimination does not get the kind of attention that other forms of discrimination do. That's simply a fact. That's just the way things are.
Yes.
What I am doing right now is I'm in law school, and because I learned that among all the things that helped me, it was ultimately the law that reached a hand out and pulled me out of the pit. But I needed to do a lot of self-education, and I think we all need to educate ourselves. I'm doing law school. I want to learn about legislation. I learned so many things I was ignorant of, beginning with the fact that the ADEA, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, is not part of Title VII. It is not part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It was designed along those lines, but it gives us less protection. So one of the things I would like is for all of us to, like I said, educate ourselves and get the legislation changed. That is why I went through with the lawsuit. That's why we got the EEOC involved. They chose our lawsuit because it looked as though we had a chance to win. I'm sorry I'm going on too long, but the last thing I want to point out is because of our lawyers' bulldog nature, we were able to get Ohio State to release emails from administrators and the directors. And as bad as the discrimination was when I was thinking it might be happening, it was even worse to read about it, to read what was actually being said and written about us. If I ever had any doubt that there is such a thing as age discrimination, I no longer have that doubt. And it's as ugly can be. So anyway, I'm in a better place now. I'm still alive, I'm not dead, but I just wanna say there is hope. So
Yes. Hope is the thing with feathers. Well,
yes.
Thank you for that good introduction also, and a good contextual background for some of the speakers that might not have heard about this from before. We will dive deeper into some of these topics, including how do we tackle gender ageism in the workplace, not only its relevance, but some of the toolkits that we can walk away, and some of the faith and also some of the collaborations we should perhaps initiate in setting up this. I will quickly hand it over now to Janine, also to introduce yourself, and then we will end with Lisa. The floor is yours, Janine.
Thank you so much. And Amanda and Julianne, just thank you so much for standing up and stepping out about this, because I know the amount of courage that it takes to do this. So when we started changing the narrative in 2018, my job was to basically travel around the state of Colorado and do workshops on how to reframe aging, what are evidence-based messages that we can do to shift people's thinking in a more positive direction. And we did a lot of workshops on ageism. So in that first year, I think I did over 40 workshops across the state of Colorado. And in every single workshop, there was somebody like Amanda or like Julianne or someone who hadn't had the courage to stand up like the two of you had. And they were saying, you know, that ageism thing you're talking about, it happened to me, it happened to my partner, it happened to my dad. You know, younger people would be telling me this. And I was like, this is, I was rather shocked at the extent. It was one thing to know the data from AARP and others about the prevalence of it. And it was another thing to hear people's stories. So the first thing that we decided to do was first to try to engage employers and try to talk to them about the business case. And I want to start this with so I was all around the state. There was one area that I was in particular, a town called Grand Junction. It's in rural Colorado. And we were doing a workshop, and as usual, we would follow it with some sort of reception or food. And there were women my age, so I'm 67, who were there with tote bags, and they were putting food in their tote bags. And that was because they were trying to live on the equivalent of $500 US in Social Security. And they couldn't get jobs, even though all around this town, there were help wanted signs everywhere, right? Because at the time, this was right before COVID-19, there was a hiring shortage. The unemployment rate was really, really low. They couldn't get jobs. So we started going to employers and saying, you're trying to fill jobs. And we started making the business case. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what struck me was the connection of, obviously bad for the women involved, right? They're dealing with poverty. You cannot live on $500 US anywhere in the US, certainly not in this particular city. It was bad for government, right? Because now you've got a group of people who, you know, have to tap into resources prematurely. And it's bad for the businesses because they're not hiring people they could. I started talking about this, and this, Amanda, so I'm so intrigued with your story. And we started talking a lot about the business case and why it made sense for business to invest and to hire, retain, retrain older people. And I got coverage both on TV and kind of newspaper. The TV reporter, who was just under 50, so I consider her extremely young, just under 50, is doing a story, and she's like, they're really not going to like that I'm doing this story. They don't like stories about older people. They just want us to skew younger. And I was like, this is so bizarre. So we have, and this is where, Julianne, it's going to pivot to your story. We decided not only did we have to raise awareness around ageism and let businesses know that they were missing the boat if they were discarding older workers, but we also decided, we knew what the law was. We knew how age discrimination laws are not as powerful and don't have the tools that race and gender discrimination cases do. So now we're organizing around policy. We actually, next Friday, and we're taking a community organizing approach. We're doing an event that will bring together older women and men. We're going to educate a large group of people about what the age discrimination laws are. We're hopeful in the US of eventually getting that Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, depending on how some of the elections go. But what we're going to try to do on a state level in Colorado is change the state law so that it has a kind of higher level of protection for older women and men. So that's kind of an introduction to our work.
Thank you, Janine, for introducing this. And we will also come back to this more in this panel around hiring processes and what needs to be done to make these more transparent. What are some of these challenges we need to learn from in this area? I will hand it over to Lisa and to introduce herself and perhaps also what Phenomenal Women Global is doing.
Hi, thank you so much, Jocelyn. My name is Lisa Sakaja. Do you hear me well? Am I loud enough?
Yes, we can hear you.
I founded an organization. I'm a co-founder of Phenomenal Women Global. This is an organization that seeks to promote, to empower, connect, and advance women. We do so by having leadership conferences, coaching, mentoring, and other career development activities. And we predominantly work with all women, but we realize that there are distinct inequalities. So we focus on women of African descent as well, migrants, and a lot of women from underserved communities. We're based here in Geneva, but we have a branch in Uganda, and we have focal points in Boston, Johannesburg, and Zimbabwe. So what we do, one of our key features is the leadership conference, which brings women of all backgrounds together annually. We have 5 around the world, but the main one is in Geneva. And in this annual conference, we have a forum where women empower each other and share experiences in order to advance in their careers. So it is multidisciplinary and multicultural, multi-generational, because we learn a lot from the women who have gone ahead of us, women who have achieved a lot, and a lot of them are even over 60. So we value the wisdom that we get from these women. But one of the other key features is that after these panels have taken place, we do have group discussions where one of them is legal and social challenges that women face. And as you spoke, I got some tips of what more to include. But one of, I believe that some of the issues that we're facing today, including ageism, can be addressed, as you said, from knowing your rights. So this panel gives women information. Although we have discussed more issues like gender-based violence and other gender-based challenges, we also discuss issues related to employment and the challenges in employment, which could also have this angle. Being an international human rights lawyer and also having worked for the UN for about 13 years, I think it's very important to look at what the international international legal framework stipulates in order for you who are working on national legislation and challenging it, in order to set the standard and in order to promote the international standards and ensure that they are entrenched in your national law, and also to be aware of the mechanisms that you could take advantage of to, in case you are discriminated. based on your age, and knowing that there is a UN independent expert on the enjoyment of rights of older persons who can also receive complaints, who can also visit countries, and who can also do reports. This is a very important resource. And also looking at conventions like the Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights that does cater for issues related to ageism, social security, protection, your employment rights, and things like that. So as phenomenal women, we try to empower and also give women information on legal issues that could affect them. So we have that space, it's a safe space. And we also try to ensure, like today, for example, I met a woman who had been fired from her job during this pandemic. Yes, she was the oldest person in the company, and she was also Black. So there were two issues that we could look at here in terms of discrimination based on age, discrimination based on race. I encouraged her to sue. She wasn't going to. I encouraged her to sue. I think she has a good case. But these are the kind of things that we try to do, because when I met her at the supermarket today, she was so low and like, I don't have a job. I don't have much money. I said, what happened? You were working. She said, well, I was the only one let go. And it's not even about the money, because the Swiss government is providing funds to organizations who feel that they are struggling during this pandemic time. So they could actually apply, or they could have even asked her if she wanted to downgrade her job, because now her job has been downgraded and is going to go to a male, white, 20-something-year-old person. So I think we need to stand together as women and even support women who maybe are not part of your entourage, but to take on or to give them the information, because I just spent 5 minutes outside the supermarket giving her the information of where she could go and giving her names of lawyers who could possibly listen to her and take her case. But because I knew her rights, she was shocked that she could even bring her case. She said, they gave me notice, but I said, there are some irregularities here in the information that you're giving me. So knowing your rights is very important for us in addition to growing both professionally and personally. Thank you.
Thank you for that inspiring way of also ending our round of introduction. I will not be asking my first question, which was perhaps to discuss what is the relevance of ageism and discussing these type of issues. Perhaps actually we should jump right into it and ask, how can these hiring processes and the workplace environments become more age inclusive? Building up on what Lisa just mentioned here at the end, some of these tools and some of these perhaps advice. What are the roadmap that we need to build out to reach that? Perhaps I would ask everyone of here to build on your personal experiences, your interests, and also the work that you've done in perhaps speaking to this, how these hiring processes and the workplace environment needs to become more age inclusive, taking into consideration this also the race and gender components, which often are much too often intersectional. Perhaps Amanda, do you want to kick off?
I mean, one thing I just wanted to say, just sort of on what Lisa said, you know, I think that the takeaway for women in any field is it cannot be understated or overstated, I'm sorry, how important it is to talk to each other and to have those conversations with your girlfriends or your colleagues or your coworkers or whatever, because often the thing that's happening to you is happening to someone else in a similar cohort, and you know, you can go home like Julia was saying and think, am I a lunatic? Is this actually, you know, you could really run the gamut in your brain of like what's actually happening. And when you talk to other people who have had similar experiences, not only do you validate yourself, but you realize how pervasive the problem is. And there's reassurance in that, but there's also empowerment in that, because now you can say, yes, we need to take action. Like if I was on my own in my specific situation, I would have just got a new job, which would have been the hope of my employer. They would have been happier had I decided to just move on. But because there were 4 other women similarly situated who were experiencing the same thing, there's strength in the numbers. And there is an invaluable relationship that has formed between the 5 of us, but also just the power that comes with knowing you're in you know, like a group of people who have shared similar experiences. The piece you're talking about in terms of hiring, honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I find that to be daunting. I'm in the middle of a lawsuit with my company, and in filing that lawsuit, I have to accept the reality that my career as a television reporter is over after this, because I don't see how I'm going to be hired somewhere else at my age. Perhaps I could have left and gotten a different job, but I would have had a shorter shelf life because of, you know, just the way the industry is moving, where there's an emphasis on youth, paying people, the technology has changed. I'm not highly compensated, but I'm definitely paid more than I was when I was 20, whatever. So, you know, that needs to change. I'm not sure what the answer is for that, because quite frankly, you just don't see people making accommodations for, especially in the media industry. You don't really see many accommodations. You do have obviously some longstanding, like Diane Sawyer, but you know, Diane Sawyer is like an icon. The woman has, you know, nobody's going to get rid of Diane Sawyer without people flipping out in theory, right? But not everybody is Diane Sawyer, right? And what's interesting about it is that, you know, you do see men who are able to continue. So I think that, I know in New York City, because of our lawsuit, the city council had drafted legislation to help, to your point about the policy part. There are a couple of city council members who have come up with some stuff where they're trying to, you know, stop people from not being hired because they have reached a certain point in their life. The bill actually had a lot of support, and they were hoping to vote on it in January, I guess, or December. But obviously the world was upended with COVID, so it's been shelved for a time. I do think that a good starting point about this is the fact that we have stood up. They have, it appears that they have stopped sort of harassing people that are a little bit older, people who didn't have certain opportunities before are being given opportunities again. And I'm sure that's a direct result of us calling out the bad behavior. So I don't know, it's a challenging question, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but I know it does start with talking about it. So that would be my takeaway.
Well, perhaps definitely highlighting communication, communicating among your colleagues and people that you don't perhaps think have experienced a similar issue, but actually have, is perhaps the kickstart of often of these. Is that something that you also realized, Julian, in this?
Yeah, that is the primary thing. That and education, I think.
Okay.
And the language that we use, the phrases that we use. You, Amanda, you said, I'll have a shorter shelf life. One of my colleagues would not wear her 25-year pin because she said it was like putting a sell-by date on her forehead. I think that kind of language is pervasive in the culture. And one of the things we can do is change the language, change the way we talk about the problems. I was thinking about this, how to change it in the work context, and I'm thinking of my own, and I was thinking there's nurturing what's there or cultivating what is there. There's remediation, and then there is self-defense or protection. Okay? For cultivating, I think is what Amanda was saying, it's establishing relationships, clearing and creating new avenues of communication. It is just laying things out on the table. It's the elephant in the room. So let's talk about the elephant. Make it as visible as possible. The problem with that is you will be disbelieved. You will be dismissed. It's got to be some other reason. It's got to be your competence that is the problem. The other thing, the next thing, remediation. There's so much that has to be repaired. I'm thinking about the academy. But for example, the system of human resources. there's a lot of work that needs to be done, that can be done with human resources personnel. In our case, the people brought in to train, to do a non-discrimination training, did not know their EOC policies. There's a lot of ignorance. The very flawed training system. So that goes back to education. There's the remediation in the form of the EEOC and the ADEA. I have now a good relationship with the EEOC Foundation, which actually underwrote our case, our lawsuit. We wouldn't have been able to do it had not the EEOC helped us pay for it. Then, yeah, it's just, I think, again, I want to go back to the fact that we just need to make it a part of everyday education.
Right.
I don't mean to harp on the news, but I was on a local news program. No, I'm sorry, it was Good Morning America. And the title of the segment was, how do we against ageism in the workplace? And they mentioned know the law, get a side gig. I forget what the other ones were,
Right.
but the segment began, there was no discussion of the law. It went right to get a side gig. And again, I want to go back to it. The law ultimately is what is going to help us.
I want to jump in here on some of what a topic you were mentioning here about training. And that is also very essential in this type of toolbox that we need to develop. It brings me also to perhaps some of the work that Janine does around certification for your age-friendly employers. Perhaps I would like to initiate a bit of conversation also around this, some of your experiences with this, and get your perspective on these. What are some of these major prejudices that you've encountered, the challenges that you worked with? Perhaps share your thought on this.
So Josephine, if it's all right, I want to layer that in, but if people are kind of familiar with oppression frameworks, I keep thinking of this and what women in age and discrimination in the workplace are dealing within kind of like the 4 eyes of oppression. And I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it starts with ideological, right? On the highest, there's this belief that younger is better, right? Yeah. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg said that, younger people are simply smarter, right? So we've got this prevailing narrative. And one of the things that changing the narrative is trying to do is actually change that narrative, that the workplace requires the benefits of both younger people and older people working together, which is why I loved when I got on this call and I saw all the range of ages, right? Because we know that intergenerational teams and intergenerational workplaces are more productive. They're more profitable for those who care about the bottom line. But we need to deal with that top level ideological narrative, because otherwise we think it's all us, right? And if we simply dye our hair or shave years off our resume, we're going to be okay. There's also, and Jillian, I'm sorry, has talked about this, the next I, institutional oppression. So we know the fact that certainly in the US, but I also know from talking to colleagues around the world that it's not just the US, that the ways the laws are written have higher protections for race and gender discrimination. So, and part of that is a question of court interpretation of the American or Age Discrimination and Employment Act. So the court interpretation in some parts of the country that ADEA actually did not apply to hiring. So it applied if you were on the job, but at least 2 courts have said it, or Circuit Court of Appeals have said it doesn't apply to hiring, right? So that leaves older people without age protection at all. interpersonal to me is where it comes down on the company level. And what we have tried to do, so on the ideological, on that top level, we have tried to change the narrative with employers and said, you're missing the boat. One, there's an issue of demographic change, right? The world is getting older. A result, you know, many of us are living longer and in some cases healthier lives, and there are declining birth rates, right, around the world. So we have an older, so any employer long-term who is simply looking at hire younger is going to go out of business, because that's one of the issues that many institutions of higher education are facing, right? There simply aren't enough younger people. So the smart workplaces are going to be thinking ahead and trying to figure out, how do we do this across the lifespan? So what we've done is we put that message out, but then we followed it by assessing employers and encouraging them to use best practices. There are 12 kind of areas, but I'll share a couple of things. One is having a very deliberate commitment to age in your diversity, equity, inclusion practices.
Okay.
So AARP had done a study that showed that of companies that had DEI policies, only 8% included age in that. So we need commitments from the top. We need deliberate inclusion. In hiring, we need to have images of people of all ages in hiring materials and so forth, and making sure that things are publicized. So we also know, and I'm not just trying to pick on Facebook here, but you know, for a while companies were using Facebook and they were targeting marketing positions using that targeting feature you can do. And if you were over age 34, you never saw the marketing positions, right? Because it was just targeted at younger people. Mm-hmm. So we can encourage, and we're training people to move away from practices like that so they can reap the benefit. The final thing, and I've already heard Amanda and Julianne talk about this, many of us as we get older, because, and I think the older we internalize more ageism, right? Because we've been surrounded by it for so long. So we start thinking, well, maybe I don't have it anymore. We do start having those feelings in our head. So one of the things we're doing at Changing the Narrative is doing, you know, in my old days as a feminist, I would have called it a consciousness raising groups, but we're getting groups of people together and saying, you know, hey, it's not just you, it's not alone. It's not just a matter of dyeing your hair, or that collectively we need to come together. And it's very hard to advocate in your individual workforce, in your individual workplace, right? Because then all of the things that might happen, like Amanda saying, I may never get a job again in broadcasting. But when we join together and advocate on then a policy level for all companies to do this, I think as women, we're in a much stronger position. So those are some of the things we're trying to do. And one of the things I'm happy to share, if you're sending out to people, is literally all the things that make an employer age friendly. So I can send that to you all and maybe you can get it out to everybody.
Thank you very much for that input, Janine. I was actually curious hearing on this. Lisa, does this resonate with some of the work you're doing with Panama Women Global? I know you also provide training, workshops, and leadership sessions for a lot of the women that are involved in your network. How have you come across these similar situations or dealing with this type of discrimination in the workplace?
I think we haven't we haven't got that many situations that we've dealt with on this, but what I can say is, and what I mean, in addition to what everyone has said, that they should be in the workplace, there should be some kind of spaces created where the older generation can share with the younger generation, because there is a wealth of knowledge that people have when they've attained a number, they have attained a number of years and achieved a number of years in a certain organization. And I feel that, and I know that a few organizations do that here, where they're able to share, two-way sharing, not just the older people sharing, but also the younger people sharing with regards to, technological aspects and issues like digital marketing and things like that. So I believe that one of the best ways to also do that is through coaching and allowing mentorship programs within organizations begin, so that people can appreciate each other and we can reduce the incidences of ageism in certain organizations. And we try to promote those kind of spaces, because for us in our organization, we value what the very experienced women ahead of us have done. And another thing I wanted to bring in, though it's not so relevant, but it can relate to this, creating your own space. Because we're talking about, yes, employment and staying on the job and not being discriminated. But I think we encourage people to think of their legacy as well. As in, once I finish with this company, once I go, what am I going to do? For me, I learned a lot from my mom, who is also a lawyer, and she's above 75. But up to this date, she is called upon by the government, for example, to advise on elections. She is part of a team of experts that is supporting vulnerable groups during elections that has been designated by our government in Uganda. So I believe that in addition to fighting for this, we should go one step ahead and say, what will my legacy be? What is my purpose and my future? And build that together so that even when you reach the statutory age of retirement and you can't be employed anymore, you do have a way you can still use your existing knowledge to support the world. Yeah.
Well, looking ahead to the future is always really essential here. And on that bright note, perhaps I would like to open up and ask, how do we sensitize the environment sufficiently early enough at the issue of age discrimination against women in the workplace? You've touched upon this, I believe, quite in some different ways, but perhaps mindful also of time, I would perhaps call and have a perhaps end of questions also around these before opening up to the floor. We could perhaps discuss a little bit here around how do we sensitize our environment here earlier enough for these. How do we engage people early on enough for this, to discuss these issues? I also know there's quite a lot of questions coming into the chat, and I wanted to give the time to have that interaction virtually.
So Josephine, I'll go ahead and jump in really quickly.
Yep.
One of the things that we've been doing, and I noticed that Charlotte was on, and a couple of Amita said, there's also just ageism also is directed against younger people, right? Like somehow at some point you're exactly the right age, but outside of that you're too young or too old. So one of the things we started doing and recognizing that Charlotte, who's the guru of this, is also on this call, we've been doing intergenerational conversations about ageism. So it's when younger women and older women get together and we talk about our mutual experiences. And this actually started with a conversation I was having with my 2 millennial age daughters. We're like, Mom, yeah, you're doing that, but you know what? People aren't taking us seriously, even though we're doing all of this. And we've basically created a toolkit for people to have these intergenerational conversations in their communities so that we can start asking the really hard question, who benefits when you're pitting one group against another, right? This isn't just about age, it's about, immigrant versus non, et cetera, but who benefits? And I think that really opens people's eyes. So again, and the toolkit is something I'm happy to share kind of after so that you can get it out.
The other thing I would add to this is, I began my career as an intern, and all of the people who showed me the way were women who had 20 years on me. Women who I respected and sort of put on this pedestal because I knew I wanted to grow into them, right? And so now on the other side of that, I have tried to be that, I have tried to offer that type of mentorship to people who are junior to me. But it is interesting because on the one hand, especially specific to the lawsuit, when we first filed, there were a group of younger women who dismissed it as if it was, our motives were not for calling out bad behavior, but there were other motives at play. And we were just, jealous and, however you characterize complaining old women, right? Like, oh, well, they're just whiny old women and they're just mad because whatever. Meanwhile, I sort of want to shout from the rooftops, like, I was the young girl who was trying to take advantage of any opportunity presented to me. But at the same time, so while you can be that person who's trying to, so your point about the millennial, people who are going through this now, you do want opportunities, but you also have to be mindful of the bigger picture of the environment, of what's happening societally, and appreciate that, like, pitting me versus my younger self is not going to get me anywhere. It's not going to get any of us anywhere, because eventually those people are going to grow up and they're going to be sitting where we're all sitting now. So it's really kind of outrageous. I think when that first happened, I was sort of like, wait, what is happening here? Because the people don't file lawsuits and talk about this stuff because they're jealous. They do this because they've been limited in their ability to perform at their best, right? Like this is not like a bunch of whiny old women who are just mad. This is like discrimination that's illegal. These are things that are illegal, to your point about the law and not knowing the law. And so I think, like, in terms of how do you start, like, I have 2 young girls, my daughters are very small, but I think, God, in how many years, it sounds too cliche, I think of, like, you know, what happens with them, but there's some truth to that. Like, what does this look like in 20 years if we don't start having really serious conversations now? What does it look like in 20 years? It only gets worse. If I'm at this age and I'm feeling this, what's going to happen next year? And if nobody talks about it, is 30 too old? You know, like, what's the perfect age? Where do we where's the cutoff? I don't know.
Yeah. Can I just chime in with that? That is exactly one of the reasons that discrimination works. I mean, it happens. It is, somebody mentioned just in the chat about the adversarial nature, pitting the younger worker against the older worker. In academia, it's new PhDs who are out looking for jobs. And in some fields, the chances are very slim that they will ever get a tenure track, full-time, full benefits job. And one of the things that's happened is I use the expression weaponized. That was used against us. It operated on me. It operated on my natural inclination to be guilty about everything. Should I step down? I had just reached the point where I was thinking to myself, I actually have something I can offer to these new grad students, to the newly minted PhDs. I really believed that I knew what I was talking about, and it took a long time for me to reach that point. But then I was told in so many ways that I was invalid and that I needed to move on. Mentoring, that's one of the things that we need to cultivate. In our program, we had a wonderful mechanism. We would hire interns for 2-year contracts, and they were paired with an experienced teacher. It was one of the things that I learned the most from. It was one of the best aspects of my job, working with the new teachers, because I had the humility to recognize that I had something to learn from the new teachers. And fortunately, we didn't encounter that kind of, being dismissed by the younger teachers as being jealous. But I can see how that would work. Again, it all goes to, we have to talk about it. I had to learn how to mentor. You have to learn how to be a mentee. So there's a lot of work that teachers can do and trainers can do, like Janine is saying.
Definitely, that concept of mentoring is definitely essential. It brings us back to the idea of education, being also to having access to that knowledge here. I know this is also some of the work that you, Lisa, are working with, sensitizing people, providing that information. Brings me back to hear the story that of your personal experience today of coming across that woman. You provided her and also the network for her to actually engage and tackle the solution.
Not a lot with aging, but a lot with supporting women with information.
Yes.
I would be interested as well in Amanda's case, having some information, because I think it would help having that background in terms of the women we have to help who was fired because of her age and possibly race. But yes, I think the most important thing for me, I think, as I said, you have to know your rights, and you have to know where to get help from, which bodies deal with this. And that's what we spend a lot of time doing when our discussions come up, when we have those discussions in our spaces or in our webinars. We are providing this information, especially in Q&A. We are providing, where can you go if you lost your job? Where can you go if you were discriminated based on your race or your gender or your age? We try to bring in lawyers as well to speak, and psychologists, because they are able to also relay what they do. So on one hand, we're also promoting people's businesses, let's say the lawyers who come in as psychologists, because we have about 150 people who come for our conferences, and they're able to access this information. And then, of course, we're also able to promote another woman's business at the same time, or a man. Sometimes we have men there. So yeah, I do find it extremely important to share, to mentor, to coach, and to support each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, on that inspiring note, I perhaps also wanted to get our virtual participants involved. I know we've had a very active chat, and I would, if there's anybody here present online, whether you're based, if you have any questions you would like to ask our participants live, our panelists, sorry, feel free to turn on your mic or your camera if you have a strong enough bandwidth. We would love to see your beautiful faces and get some virtual interaction also going. This is what we also wanted to create around here tonight, a conversation. So if there's any questions, feel free to open up, or else we can also have them coming through the Q&A. I saw we had a question earlier on from Despina Anastasiou.
No, hi, this is Despina now. I can ask another question. I think the comment that I posed was a little bit rhetorical, but my question to whoever would like to answer it, particularly those that have directly experienced some form of ageism, what kind of advice would you be giving to others from a reflective point of view? So if you were talking to the 25-year-old version of yourself, and I apologize, Amanda, because you're not far from that anyway, like all the rest of us, what advice would you be giving? I mean, is there something that we could have done differently in the way we brand ourselves, in the way that we position ourselves, in the way that we maybe prepare ourselves for encore type of, you know, a bit like what Herminia Barra talks about with identity changes, versus all of a sudden hitting this, what sometimes feels like a wall? Whoever wants to answer it, I'll let.
Okay, just very quickly, that's a great question. And I would go back to, again, the language we use. I have 4 nieces. They're finishing college and they're going into the workplace. Also, there are younger I got my job back, and again, I'm working with some younger teachers. Don't make disparaging jokes about your age. It sounds silly, but I am a big one for self-deprecating humor. I'm a wisecracker, but I find myself cringing when somebody says something that even smacks of some kind of age disparaging comment about themselves. Don't say having an elder moment, and even younger than that. You know, teachers in their 20s making jokes about themselves. It sounds like a superficial thing, but it is language, and that is just it creates the atmosphere. It's the foundation. It's the means of interaction. So that's one piece of advice I would give. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, but to Despina and you, Julian. So for me, it's also like walking a thin line in a certain degree, that you are not giving into a certain narrative about yourself. So on the one hand, you should be yourself in a certain degree, but actually the surroundings are designed in a way that make you co-produce and collaborate in your own oppression in these situations. Exactly. Because in many of those situations you only can certainly lose. When you fight, you are I don't know, the overly sensitive person, when you are set up in some kind of a lose-lose situation.
Exactly.
And walking this line is can be tough. So I wouldn't go so far, Despina, to put on certain strategies or behaviors that are like hiding who you are and what you stand for, but rather to embrace this somehow and build local networks of allies in this.
Yeah, and when I say don't make jokes about yourself, I understand what you're saying, Dana. When somebody says you look good for 65, I now say, this is what 65 looks like. I mean, I don't look good. I look good, period, maybe. It's, yes, I'm 65 and this is what 65 looks like. I'm 65 and I've lived this long. I've had all these experiences, and I'm not a butt of humor. I even get mad when I'm watching The Simpsons, and why is it necessarily by definition funny that an old woman wants to hit on a younger man? And I have been, even by my sisters, I'm dismissed and said, oh, you're being oversensitive. No, I'm being sensitive. And we need to look at this stuff. So yes, Dana, I know exactly what you're talking about. And there is that fine line between watching what you say, because it will be, I'm contributing to it by making the jokes. I don't have senior moments. I've always been this dopey. I've always forgotten things. So anyway.
I just wanted to add something really quick to the
Go ahead,
one question. If I was thinking to myself, what happened, or what happens when you get, for at least my experience, I was sort of like, this can't be because of my age. Like, I'm not that old yet. Like, this is what? Like, and I think if I was talking to myself at a younger time, I would be like, live your full life at every age you're at, but also be sort of aware of how pervasive the comments and the societal stuff and what people say and what you see in the news and on TV, and what are the tones. Like, I think I would say to myself, like, be sort of aware of like what it means globally to be this age, and then what does it mean to be this age, and maybe challenge those definitions so that later on you're better equipped to say, this is not how it should be, this is not what my experience has been. Or just because we're at a stage where those norms can change, but they're so deeply ingrained that if you don't start telling yourself at an early age, as early as, I talk to my kids about this stuff already, they're probably going to kill me by the time they're 20, like they'll be over it already. But I think it's really important to start challenging those norms as soon as possible, because I think then you will be better prepared to identify it if it's happening to you, know what to do, if how you can protect yourself and fight back. Yeah. And it's the same idea that Julie says about not saying the negative self-talk and not allowing the comment that's the untoward comment or whatever. Those are just like small things, but they amount to big things when you put your foot down. Then maybe somebody else puts their foot down and they give pause, right? That's how it all starts. You start, and then someone notices, oh, she doesn't talk like that anymore. Maybe I won't either. And then you can, start small, I guess.
Josephine, can I just add something really quickly?
Sure. I also wanted to hand it over to
additional thought to Despina, and I know you've got a lot of things going on in the comment. One of the things before COVID-19, one of the arguments that we were making to employers that got a lot of traction was essentially what you want is the best talent. And here are some advantages that older people can bring. They can, research shows better communication skills, less rattled. I mean, there are certain things, and I'll share this with the group, But I think as an individual, I mean, I think we should all be fighting collectively for public policy changes, right? And to convince employers they're making a mistake. But if you're the individual, what you're positioning yourself is, here are the strengths that you have, and here's what you're bringing to that employer. So I think really focusing and thinking about the strengths and the wisdom and the insight that you have as you get older. We found a lot of employers were literally then calling us and saying, okay, you've convinced us, where do we find these older workers? So, you know, COVID-19 obviously has changed everything right now, but I think it's worth going back to.
No, thank you for that input. I also wanted, before wrapping out our panel today, I'm also mindful of time, I wanted to hand it over to Meredith. Meredith, the floor is yours. You had also some comments and some questions you want to ask.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that I took today, these hours, to be with all of you. You know, we're all saying so much of the same, and we've just spent quite a bit of time on employment. And I'd like to go back a little bit to some of what Dana was talking about. And I think that, so I come from my life's work being in aging. So I have sat with, I don't even know how many thousands of people aging who have shared their stories of aging. And many of them, of course, have been women. My own circumstance, very quickly, I grew up in a home with a mother who was a feminist. She's now 89. And I grew up with her fists in the air. The next generation, myself, daughter and all, have taken up with her, she's still living, this mission, I guess, in life, that everyone can empty a dishwasher and women are not born to do so. I've been in healthcare more. So in that arena, and going back to some of what Dana was talking about with transgender folks and others in the LGBT community, I think that it's all of us, right? But again, we know that we've dealt with sexism, racism, ableism, and we've got ageism. It's impossible to really do just one without the others. So intersectionality is critical to all of this. So I have spent all my years, day and night, working. I'm starting to pull back. And at the age that I am now ready to put that, you know, self forward in as much as I can. So I'm doing as much, you know, as in the Boston area, but I'm connecting with others at this point because I think the juices are flowing. And as I listen to each one of you, we are all women. We are all women of different ages. And I think some of what I've heard collectively is, let's stop the we and the them and the us and the them, and even using the word millennials, the elderly. Why do we have to, right? We always have to label, which is a way of marginalizing often. So yeah, let's gather together. I love nothing more than a powerful conversation. It just gets me going with a woman who's 20, who's 30, who's 16. This is so important because I am learning every day from younger women. And I do believe younger women are learning from us. So we have to think about employment, no question, but there's so many other arenas. I'm sure you're all with me. Healthcare is tremendous right now in what's happening, and particularly with COVID. We all know that ageism has just been an outrageous situation with COVID in terms of how dispensable a person of my age or older could be. So just want to put it out there.
No, thank you for putting it out there. I think that is perhaps a wonderful way to wrap up our panel for today.
I'm sorry, Janine, I'll just interrupt you here. Because we started this panel a little later, I think we can still go on with a couple more questions. So yeah, just to let you know that we can, if everybody's okay with eating a bit of the break, because we have started this panel later, we can continue just a little bit more.
Okay, well, we seem to have, I would say, 5 to 10 minutes more. If there is any more questions in our very lively Zoom chat this afternoon or this morning, wherever you're based, feel free to pop in. We could take some more questions here. I am looking at the chat to see what interesting questions we could have also to come out. If there's anything else that you would like at this point of time from any of our 4 speakers, feel free to open also your mic. I know we were also in the middle of conversation here with Meredith.
I personally had a question. So I'm about or on the way to enter the job market, as many of my peers who are preparing this conference with me and behind in the participants of the Zoom. And I had a question to our panelists: what can we do as we're obviously facing ageism in a different way because we are lacking experience and we need to get a job somehow, but yeah, that's another conversation. But my question was, once we do enter the job market, how can we be actors for anti-ageism in the workplace, and what can we do to fight age discrimination for older women in the workplace?
I'm happy to jump in just really quickly, and thank you for that question. Somebody mentioned earlier in the chat the idea of reciprocal mentoring, and I think Charlotte certainly can talk about it. But I think for younger people to indicate that you're interested in being mentored and learning, and likewise, those of us who are older in the workplace saying we really value learning from younger people. So it's reciprocal. It's not just kind of one way. And I think asking for that. And the other thing that I think is really important is very often now, and I think especially now because of racial injustice and equity issues, companies are really looking at their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, as they should about race, certainly, and in gender. It's a perfect opportunity to also say, and where is age included in all of this? And what opportunities do you have for training people across lifespans? So I think that there are just, a lot of opportunities, and also calling on older people that you know to help you get that kind of foot in the door. I mean, I think to me, if the mentoring, and one of the things we do at Changing the Narrative, and I've always done, is a lot of mentoring, internships, apprenticeships, so that we can bring people in, and starting that before you actually hit the door, I think it's a really good way to do it. Thank you for the question. It's great.
Yeah, very quickly, I just wanted to add what Janine mentioned first is appearing open to working with the established teachers, for example, because I do still feel a certain amount of hesitation. I don't automatically reach out to a younger worker. I do occasionally feel dismissed or, kind of ignored. I don't think I'm hypersensitive to it anymore, but it does make a difference if it's both directions. If I feel like somebody's seeking me out, when the moment that I realized I had something to offer came about as a result of a young graduate student coming into my class and plopping herself down and saying, "Am I crazy?" And I asked her what was going on. And the result of that was I told her I was able to give her some advice coming from my experience as a graduate student, essentially telling her, no, you're not crazy, but you're in graduate school, so you're supposed to feel a little bit crazy. It's the way things work. They shouldn't work that way, but they do. So yeah, she was open to it. And it made me feel so like I could do something. Like I said, that was the moment when I realized maybe I do have something to offer. And that I was 58 when that happened. So it happens.
Well, I hope that also provided some answer to your question, Emily. It was also nice to perhaps get this younger perspective also on the topic. It is a question that is on the minds of a lot of the younger generation today, especially in a post-COVID world. It's among those many questions that we have to ask ourselves. I am mindful of time, and I also perhaps wanted to wrap up with some concluding remarks from all of our 4 panelists. I will hand it over to you for some concluding remarks and your outlook on tackling age discrimination and ageism in the workplace, and for tonight or this morning. I will hand it over to you, Lisa.
To me?
Yes, if you don't mind taking the word
Oh,
first.
yeah, okay. Maybe I should.
Sorry for putting you on the spotlight like that. Didn't mean to.
3 takeaways. Maybe I could just give 3 takeaways, and just also hooking on to the lady who just asked her question. For the younger generation, to be proactive when you join a new job. If there are any processes going on within your organization, like strategic planning, policy making, any other processes, to bring the issue up. And also because I know when you start a new job, they do ask you like, what are your expectations, what teams you want to join, or things like that. Bring it up in a strategic way, that you want to learn to ensure that ageism is tackled and issues like that. And I think they will think you're quite smart, actually, because it's something that is really neglected. And then the second point I could bring up is, of course, know your rights. People should continue to know in your particular area where you live, what is the legislation like, and what are the gaps? What are the organizations working on this issue, so that you can join forces in case there's a petition or there's an issue that you want to bring up. I think that's quite important. And then thirdly, of course, is to be united as women. So when you get up there in the elevator, send it down to someone else, you know that saying, so that you can also help her rise in whatever career path she's in, whatever age. And I think we should also continue to use the knowledge of people who have so much wisdom and so many years of experience in all our organizations. We should continue to call on them to share and to mentor people. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I will hand it over to Amanda.
I would say that all of you really have sort of informed different perspectives, and I think a lot about this issue a lot, and I question my decision about participating in a lawsuit. And for me, it always comes down to being on the right side of the argument and doing the hard thing, even though it's the hard thing, it's the right thing. I would say that my takeaway from this really has been about empowering women, help each other. We need to be helping each other. We need to be communicating with each other, and we really need to be educating each other. We didn't really touch on this much, but obviously, like, the pay parity issue is a big one as well. For women and men, and that's probably a whole other Zoom call we can have in the future. But so often, we don't talk. Salaries are discouraged. We're discouraged from talking about salaries, and then you wake up and you realize that, men are being drastically paid drastically higher than you are, but even some of your female coworkers who had talked to each other earlier are being paid at a different rate, and you're like, wait, what's happened here? So I just think if as women, because we all collectively know how important we are, we have all, I can say with certainty that I can name 100 women that I aspire to be like, and that's good for us, but everybody else needs to sort of catch on with that, right? Like, we're seeing some of the change that's happening now, obviously nationally, but even, like Major League Baseball yesterday announces its first female GM. I mean, these are things that are happening that we couldn't have dreamed of happening, but why not, right? Like, why not? So I would just say, the road to sort of clearing some of this stuff up is really just the partnership and the communication piece that I think really its importance can't be overstated, because, I get by with a little help from my friends. It sounds cliche, but it really is important, because these are hard things that we experience. As women, we have high constitutions. We have very high tolerance for nonsense, I think. And we shouldn't. I know, like, a man in my situation his tolerance would have been, he would have been past the point of his tolerance probably 2 years before I was, because I kept thinking, like, it's going to get better. I'm trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm trying to, keep pushing through. I'll just keep working harder, and I'll prove to them that I'm worth it. So yeah, I do appreciate you all giving us the opportunity to talk about all this, because it is insanely important. But really just on a sort of micro level, the macro level is just, you know, have these kinds of conversations, but the micro level for everybody who's like listening is really just to talk to each other, share your experiences, because you're not crazy. This is a thing, it's an invisible thing, as Janine, I think you mentioned, but it's, or Julie, it's, you know, it's everywhere, and it needn't be anymore. And that's, you know, that's really my takeaway. So thank you for having me here today.
No, the pleasure has been all ours. Thank you. I will quickly hand it over to Janine for some concluding remarks.
Too much.
Okay.
The idea of intersectionality, I have also learned that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And discrimination of any form happens in the same way. And when it is systemic, when it's institutional, it is a behemoth. It's something that can be difficult to combat. And I think, as Amanda was saying, it starts with language. It starts with talk. It starts with recognition. So yeah, I'm very grateful for this conference. I think you're doing a good thing. And I'm so excited to talk to and hear from people, women from all over the world. It's very exciting. Can't wait to tell my sisters about it.
Well, I'm glad you're as excited. Janine, I will hand it over to you.
You bet. So first, this has given me great hope. I just, looking at people from around the world of different ages, it gives me great hope. I have always believed in what Dr. Martin Luther King said about the moral arc of the universe, bending towards justice. And I do think that ageism is a justice issue and intersects in every way with race and gender. And this is a justice issue, but I have great hope about the fact that for me, when it's a Saturday morning, for others, I know it's an evening, that all of these people are here to talk about two things we can do, I believe. One, we need to be united in this. There is such, Dana pointed out some other examples, all of us have mentioned, there's such strong us versus them narrative. It's we, you know, today for each one of us, this is the oldest we've ever been. And each of you, before you go to sleep tonight, think, this is the youngest I'm ever gonna be, right? If we're lucky, we're all headed in that direction. We're all waking up tomorrow morning older. I do think it's really important to talk, and that conversations like this, and this will be my final word, are really important, and we need to support each other and we need to talk, but we need to move it to action as well. And I'll give you an example of how eager people are to do things. Yesterday, we are organizing next Friday, basically in Colorado, kind of a workshop, a convening, something like this, and we entitled it Addressing Workplace Age Discrimination. Here's what happened. I sent a notice out, and within like 30 minutes, I had to upgrade my Zoom because over 100 people had already signed up. And what we said was, we're going to talk about it. We're going to have some speakers sharing their stories. We're going to have lawyers telling us what we can do. And we're going to have policymakers telling us how the policies need to be changed. And then you're going to make a commitment. And right now, I think when I looked this morning, we've got over 200 people signed up. So people are willing to take action, but we need to drive it, right? Because we understand it. So thank you all for doing this, because I think this is a really important step.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janine, for those concluding remarks. And on these notes, I will bring this first panel to an end. I hope that all our virtual participants have enjoyed and found this as inspirational as I have. I would like to thank our 4 panelists tonight, wherever you are based. I know you're all in different time zones, so I'd like to thank you virtually for joining us today or tonight.